I'm Miss Kinder, and I'm helping Miss Laverty with the lesson today. I've met a lot of you, and others I have not met. The thing about the Holocaust is, how did we get there? How did Hitler come to power and convince people to kill 6 million Jewish people? It's almost unfathomable. Okay, steps to genocide. Remember, this is happening in 1933 to 1945. Holocaust is a noun. It is the Greek word meaning sacrifice by fire. The Holocaust is a proper noun. The Holocaust was the persecution and murder of approximately 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators. Genocide, the crime of destroying a group of people because of their ethnic, national, racial, or religious identity. The Nazis targeted these groups: Jewish people and Gypsies, Poles and Russians. They hated people who were gay, and they hated anyone who had any kind of disability. And that's a lot of people in my family, so it's very upsetting. They hated communists and socialists. They hated Jehovah's Witnesses and Jewish people, and anyone else who opposed them. Genocide was not the first step, friends. Upon their ascent to power, the Nazis established concentration camps for the imprisonment of all enemies. They built them before anything happened. Sentences could be a few months or a few years. This poem. They came for the communists, and I didn't object, for I wasn't a communist. They came for the socialists, and I didn't object, for I wasn't a socialist. They came for the labor leaders, and I didn't object, for I wasn't a labor leader. They came for the Jews, and I didn't object, for I wasn't a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to object. This person wrote it, and he's right. You have to start standing up to things that you see, even if you think they're small. All the inmates in the camps had different symbols. And of course, here is the Star of David. They started making all of the Jewish people wear these. And they tricked them, and they lied to them. They said, well, aren't you proud of your heritage? Don't you want to wear the Star of David? So they could easily identify them. And here are some people waiting in line to get into the camps. This is how the Nazis controlled people. Slave labor helped to kill their enemies. What was taken from Jews was used to provide goods for the German people. So they would take things from them and then repurpose them. It's evil. There was an escalation of hate. It started with stereotyping. So when you stereotype someone in the halls of Hefner, please know that you are escalating hate. Then prejudice against a certain group. Then it started discrimination, not allowing them in places or to go places because of who they were. Then institutionalized government-sponsored racism. That is laws in place to make sure that the Jewish people couldn't do anything. And then finally, genocide. First up, they said you cannot live among us as Jews. Okay? It's systemic racism. Prejudice, attitude, stereotyping, discrimination, and harassment. That's how it started. Anti-Semitism is a noun, and it's hostility toward or discrimination against Jewish people. They started creating posters and books and all type of things to make the Jewish people look awful. They would make them out to be the people who wanted to conquer the world. They wanted people to be scared of them. But this was, of course, not right. The personification of the devil as the symbol of all evil assumes the living shape of the Jew. Hitler said that. And this guy was the minister of propaganda. And he said, if you love Germany, then you hate the Jews. And here are these, they were portrayed like they were going to take over the world and that they were evil. But in turn, it was the Nazis who were evil. The Nazis believed in the Aryan race. That people of Northern European ancestry, especially those with blue eyes and blonde hair, were superior to all other people. In 1933, there were few people of African or Asian ancestry living in Germany. There were very few black people. There were very few people who were Asian. There were, however, 500,000 Jews who seemed to threaten racial purity. And it's quite ironic because Hitler didn't have blonde hair, blue eyes whatsoever. They printed things like this. You know, this is what you should look like, Hitler's youth. And then he, of course, wrote Mein Kampf, which is a horribly awful book. The power of words. The great masses of the people will more easily fall victim to a big lie than a small one. How fortunate for leaders that men do not think. Ugh. The victor will never be asked if he told the truth. I believe today I am acting in the sense of the Almighty Creator. By warding off the Jews, I am doing the Lord's work. What do all these quotations have in common? Hitler said them. He was doing the Lord's work by killing people. I don't think so. They made games, board games for German children that basically like exit and get rid of all the Jewish people. So they start being inundated with this at a very young age. They start learning that Jewish people are awful at a very young age. How did they know who was Jewish? German churches began to collaborate with Nazis by supplying records indicating who was Christian and who was Jewish. This is like the first kind of computer-looking thing. The data was processed, take a census. Early on, Nazis included questions on religious heritage for this reason, so they could pick out who was Jewish. The machine allowed Nazi officials to tabulate huge amounts of data very quickly. On April 1st, 1933, Hitler declared a one-day boycott of Jewish shops. And people voluntarily did it. So ugly. Jewish books were burned in public bonfires. You can see them doing the, Heil Hitler. And they celebrated their hate. The Nuremberg laws turned prejudice and discrimination into systemic racism. For example, in 1935, so it's happening very slowly. It kind of started happening in 1930. So now it's 5 years later. Jewish newspapers could no longer be sold. 1936, a year later, Jewish people lost the right to vote. And then 2 years after that, Jewish people had to surrender their driver's license and car registrations. The Nuremberg laws also classified degrees of Jewish blood. This is really hard to talk about because it's so ugly, but one proposed solution to the Jewish problem was sterilization, meaning making sure men could not have babies that were Jewish. By 1938, all Jewish people, so another, year later, all Jewish people were required to carry identification cards. Jewish passports and papers were marked with a J. And they've tricked them. They said, okay, aren't you proud to be a Jewish person? Don't you want to show it off? Because the Jewish people did not know what the ultimate goal was. Then Germans start to hurt their businesses, destroying them, throwing bricks through the windows. Then, many Jewish people attempted to leave Germany, but Great Britain, Canada, and the United States would not let them in. These ships arrived on the shores of America, and we told them no. We had our own issues. We were dealing with the Jim Crow South, we were dealing with all of that. And so we turned them around. They would arrest you if you tried to escape. This is where I think that the ghetto word has kind of been taken. This is where it came from. They were called Jewish quarters. This is you packing your suitcase. They would give you 5 minutes to put all of your belongings in one suitcase, and they would lie to them. And they would say, it's fine, you're going to be with your people, you'll all be together, it's going to be fine. Your kids are going to get to go to school there. But they took them to these places, and they were horrific. The Nazi ghettos were a preliminary step in the annihilation of the Jews. Ghettos became transition areas used as collection points for deportation to concentration and death camps. Inside these places, it was horrific. There was no water, there was hardly any food. There were child mortality rates, children dying, medical supplies were virtually non-existent, and it was awful. In 1941, German Jews were taken into protective custody and deported to concentration camps built in eastern Germany and Poland. They started rounding them up. And so now you're saying, well, yeah, I'm not gonna do that. I'm gonna try to rise up. By the time they got to this stage, it was too late. In response to the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, the Nazis destroyed the ghetto and moved the residents farther east to safety because these people said we've had enough, but then it didn't work. Jews carried their few remaining possessions to train stations. And again, they're lied to. We're going to take you someplace with more food and more room. It's going to be awesome for you. So they very willingly lined up because the conditions inside the ghettos were awful. They were then transported in freight and cattle cars. Not only were there no chairs, but the trains also lacked sanitation, food, water, and air. They were in there like animals. The concentration camps were built on railroads to make it easy. On arrival, all were given numbers. Some had them tattooed on their wrists. In the trains, they were packed in. Imagine you feel like you're about to suffocate. There's wall-to-wall people, and there's nowhere to go to the bathroom. There's no food. And these people, they get out to get fresh air, and they were so burning up and dehydrated that they immediately got into the mud to try to cool off. They treated them like animals. You cannot live. And they wanted to improve the quality of the German race. Nazi police were told to eliminate people unworthy of life. They started mobile killing units where they just would put people up and kill them. During this time, they thought to have killed as many as 1 million people in 6 months. The final solution, that's the code name for the plan to destroy the Jews of Europe. In December 1941, all Jewish people were rounded up under the excuse of a resettlement program. Here they are lying to them again, and they were sent to death camps in the East. The whole world didn't know that this was happening. It was hush-hush. Most normal people in Germany didn't know that this was happening. I don't know why that keeps happening. Okay. On January 20th, 1942, this person, General Reinhard Heydrich, started implementing it. He met with top Nazi officials in which the plans to coordinate the final solution were outlined. Nobody stood up to it. At these conferences, these evil men, Eichmann, this guy, observed that poison gas was already being used to exterminate the mentally handicapped people. So he devised a gassing procedure. He set up things that look like showers and tricked them again. And they're in this area where they think they're going to get a shower, and they're killed. He was finally caught. All of these people, 15 men who were educated, came to this mansion, and they decided that this was a good idea. The results of this war will be the total annihilation of the Jewish people. Nobody said anything. The leader of the SS and head of all the police forces, Heinrich Himmler, spent much of 1943 implementing the final solution by using his control over the courts and civil service to advance the racial reordering of Europe. Himmler paid particular attention to the fate of the 600,000 Jews of France. When trying to pass a British checkpoint after the war, the fugitive was recognized and arrested. He bit into a cyanide pill, so he knew what he was doing was wrong. And he died in moments because he's a coward. The SS were put in charge of the day-to-day operations of the death camps. Many of the guards claimed that after the war, they had just been following orders. We were trained to obey orders without even thinking. And that's what Hitler said, right? How great it is for me that men don't think. The sign over the entrance to Auschwitz was one of the biggest death camps. It was the largest one. It says, "Work makes one free." Again, they were lied to. Come in, work, and then we'll let you go. But it was not that. They killed millions there. You can see here, the green are the work camps, and the red were the death camps. And the goal was to get everybody from the work camps into the death camps to where they'd be all gone. What they did to these people when they arrived at these camps is hard to listen to. Of course, Hitler wanted to take over the world. So eventually America and other people, allies, got together and brought him down. But not until they were directly threatened. And it was horrific. A lot of them died in the gas chambers. A lot of them died of malnutrition, not being able to be fed. Once elected, you began the process of extermination. Which meant to die. This is an actual picture of luggage that would be left for collection. And again, they were lied to. Get in line, we're going to take your stuff, you'll get it back later. And then they dehumanized them. You had to remove all of your valuables. This is a picture of people's wedding rings. Then you removed your shoes and clothes. So they humiliated you. You were standing there naked to nothing. This is a picture of eyeglasses that were taken from the people who were lined up. And again, they're saying, don't worry, you're going to take a shower and you're going to get all better. It's going to be fine. Don't worry, it's fine. Then they removed their hair, which is horrific. Finally, they were put in gas chambers disguised as showers. They used the poisonous gas. People would be dead in 3 to 15 minutes. That's a long time to stand with your mom or your brother, your neighbor, and die and watch them die. Up to 8,000 people were gassed per day at Auschwitz. It was the largest death camp with 4 operating gas chambers. They would make the people who were working at Auschwitz go in and take gold fillings from their teeth after they were dead. So they melted them down to make gold bars. Prisoners had to move dead bodies into massive crematoriums. You would go in, if you were still alive and be one of the lucky ones, you would go in and you might find your best friend in there and have to put them in an oven. They had daily death quotas. They gassed men, women, elderly, and children. These ovens were used to cremate the remains of the people. These were the major death factories. And there's Auschwitz at the ends. They killed 1.6 million. Nearing the end of the war, they knew they were going to lose. So they started to try to destroy everything because they knew what they were doing was wrong. They started having death marches. Nazis ordered marches over long distances. Basically, they marched them to death. 375,000 prisoners perished in death marches. They also knew that since America was coming, they would just line them up and shoot them. On January 27th, 1945, the Soviet army entered Auschwitz and liberated more than 7,000 remaining prisoners who were mostly ill and dying. Even after liberation, people continued to die. 14,000 prisoners died from April 15th to June 20th, 1945, because they were in such poor condition. The commander of Auschwitz was asked if the Jews whom he had murdered had in any way deserved their fate. He answered, "Don't you see? We SS men were not supposed to think about these things. Besides, it was something already taken for granted that the Jews were to blame for everything." They said it wasn't their fault, even though they killed so many people. The European Jewish population in 1933 was 9 million. After the Holocaust, there were only about 3 million. Okay, some of you are saying, but I would have revolted. Here's the deal. If you started outwardly speaking out against the Nazis, they would kill you too. So there were some revolts, okay? There were some attempted escapes. Auschwitz inmates were like, I've had it, I'm going to revolt, but they failed. They were trying to destroy the ovens and the gas chambers, and it didn't work. There were some big heroes. Oskar Schindler was one of them. He was a businessman. There is a movie called Schindler's List, and he first profited from the war. He had a lot of money, but then he saw what was happening, and he knew he had to be smart about it. He couldn't just go and say, this is wrong. So in his factory, he brought families back together. He would go to the death camps and say, I need this person, and this person to help in my factory. They have a skill that I need. And he said they were essential workers, and he would bring them back together. And there was always a lookout, and he would feed them. He saved 1,300 people from dying. And he would even have to play. Like, he would act like he hated the Jewish people when he went to the death camps. When they came and, made sure he was working them to death and making them, they had a lookout, and he would have to pretend he hated them. He was really smart about it. There was some justice. They had the Nuremberg war crimes trials. And then there was a promise. And never again. Education and remembrance are the only cures to hatred and bigotry. But we're going to read Anne Frank. And Anne, although her family is being hunted, she's a lot like you guys. She is ornery and dreams of romance and gets in big trouble, and I think you're going to really like her.